Hello, my dear students. Welcome you all to another topic of e-learning. And today I am going to discuss about one of the learning theories, that is operant conditioning by B.F.Skinner. Operant conditioning is sometimes referred to as instrumental conditioning. It is a method of learning that occurs through reward and punishment for behaviors. Through operant conditioning, an association is made between a behavior and a consequence for that behavior. Operant conditioning, as said, was coined by behaviorist B.F. Skinner. That's why it is also sometimes referred as Skinner's conditioning. Skinner believed that and suggested that we should look at the external observable causes of human behavior. Skinner was more interested in how the consequences of people's action influence the behavior. Skinner used the term operant to refer to any active behavior that operates upon the environment to generate consequences. His theory was heavily influenced by the work of psychologist Edward Thorndike, who had proposed what he called the law of effects. According to these principles, actions that are followed by desirable outcomes are more likely to be repeated, while those followed by undesirable outcomes are less likely to be repeated. Operant conditioning relies on a fairly simple premise, that is, actions that are followed by reinforcement will be strengthened and more likely to occur again in the future, and actions that results in punishments or undesirable consequences will be weakened and less likely to occur again in the future. Skinner has discussed two types of behaviors, that are respondent behaviors and operant behaviors. So let's see what the respondent behaviors and operant behavior means. Respondent behaviors are those that occur automatically and reflexively, such as pulling your hand back from a hot stove, and operant conditions or the behaviors are more conscious and under control. Some may occur spontaneously and others purposely. But it is the consequences of these actions that then influence whether or not they occur again in the future. Our actions on the environment and the consequences of that actions make up an important part of the learning process. Skinner has invented different devices during his boyhood, and he put these skills to work during his studies on the operant conditioning. He created a device known as operant conditioning chamber, most often referred to as Skinner box. The chamber was essentially a box that could hold a small animal such as rat or a pigeon. The box also contained a bar or a key that the animal could press in order to receive a reward. In order to track responses or reward, Skinner also developed a device known as cumulative recorder. The device recorded responses as an upward movement of a line so that response rates could be rated by looking at the slope of the line. There are several key concepts in operant conditioning. One of the most key concept, or the main concept in operant conditioning is reinforcement. Reinforcement in operant conditioning is any event that strengthens or increases the behavior it follows. There are two kinds of reinforcers, that is positive reinforcer and negative reinforcer. Positive reinforcers are favorable events or outcomes that are presented after the behavior. In situations that reflect positive reinforcement, a response or behavior is strengthened by the addition of something such as praise or a direct reward. negative reinforcer. Negative reinforcers involves the removal of an unfavorable event or outcomes after the display of the behavior. In these situations, a response is strengthened by the removal of something considered unpleasant. Next is punishment in operant conditioning. Punishment is the presentation of an adverse event or outcome that causes a decrease in the behavior it follows. There are two kinds of punishment, that is positive and negative punishments. Positive punishments are sometimes referred to as punishment by application, presents an unfavorable event or outcome in order to weaken the response it follows. Negative punishment is also known as punishment by removal. Occurs when a favorable event or outcome is removed after a behavior occurs. In both of these causes of punishment, the behavior decreases. As reinforcement is the main or the key concept of operant conditioning, we need to reinforce a person or a behavior time to time. Here Skinner has discussed about the reinforcement schedule. So, reinforcement is not necessarily a straightforward process, and there are a number of factors that can influence how quickly and how well new things are learned. Skinner found that when and how often behaviors were reinforced played a role in the speed and strength of acquisition. In other words, the timing and the frequency of the reinforcement influenced how new behaviors were learned and how old behaviors were modified. Skinner identified several different schedules of reinforcement that impact the operant conditioning process. First is continuous reinforcement. It involves delivering a reinforcement every time a response occurs. Learning tends to occur relatively quickly here. Yet, the response rate is quite low. Extension also occurs very quickly once reinforcement is halted. Next, it is fixed ratio schedule. Fixed ratio schedules are a type of partial reinforcement. Responses are reinforced only after a specific number of responses have occurred. This typically leads to a fairly steady response rate. Next, fixed interval schedules. Fixed interval schedules are another form of partial reinforcement. Reinforcement occurs only after a certain interval of timing has elapsed. Response rates remain fairly steady and start to increase as the reinforcement time draws near, but slow immediately after the reinforcement has been delivered. Next is variable ratio schedule, which are also a type of partial reinforcement that involve reinforcing behavior after a varied number of responses. This leads to both the high response rate and slow extinction rate. Last is variable interval schedules, which are the final form of partial reinforcement Skinner has described. This schedule involves delivering reinforcement after a variable amount of time has elapsed, and this also tends to lead to a fast response rate and slow extinction rate. Now, let's discuss about the educational application. In the conventional learning situation, operant conditioning applies largely to issues of classes and students' management rather than a learning content. It is very relevant to shaping skill performance. Here, shaping is important. A simple way to shape behavior is to provide feedback on learner performance, such as compliments, approval, encouragement, and affirmation. A variable ratio produces the highest response rate for students learning a new task, whereby initially enforcement, the examples such as praises, occurs at frequent intervals, and as the performance improves, reinforcement occurs less frequently until eventually only exceptional outcomes are responded or reinforced, such as, for example, if a teacher wants to encourage students to answer in class or answer the question, the teacher should praise the students for every attempt regardless of whether their answer is correct or not. Gradually, the teacher have to or will only praise the students when their answer is correct, and over the time only exceptional answers will be praised. Here, unwanted behaviors such as dominating class discussions can be extinguished through being ignored by the teacher rather than being reinforced by having attention drawn to them. Next, practice should take the form of question, that is stimulus, or the answer response frames which expose the students to subject in gradual steps. Next, requires the learner make a response for every frame and receive immediate feedback. The students should be given a feedback. Next, the teachers should try to arrange the difficulty of the questions so the response is always correct and hence a positive reinforcement is given. Next, ensure that good performance in the lesson is paired with secondary reinforcers such as we said verbal praises, prizes and good grace. Thus, in operant conditioning, reinforcement is the key element, and in Skinner, that is SR theory, which is also called stimulus response theory. A responsor or the reinforcer is anything that strengthens the desired response.